This guy right here is a legend in TV and radio and all around media. You might remember his name and his voice from BET in the early days, and also now from Rap Radar, a couple of radio stations up and down the East Coast. A big time music programmer for the network, the BET network in the 80s, and just a very vocal personality on music and the game in general. He's got a book out. It's called Blackout: My 40 Years in the Music Business. Please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program, new friend of the family, Paul Porter. Paul,
Man,
big brother.
thank you, Lamont, man. How you, bro? You trying to age
I'm good.
me, man. I was at BET in the 90s and early 2000s, man. I don't want to be that old yet.
Yeah, okay. You were at the radio station, that unnamed radio station in the 80s. So my bad. I had it flipped.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Capitan. What did Donnie used to call you? El Capitan?
Yeah, well, I put the L in there, man, as I branched into my Latin community, but he dubbed me the captain back in the day.
Yeah. Captain Paul Porter. Paul Porter. So you're originally from Boston, I believe. And
I went to school in Boston. I'm from Queens, Jamaica Funk,
Queens.
Tom Brown, man. Yeah.
Queens.
I
Okay.
went to school in Boston and migrated to D.C.
Right. Now, what brought you to D.C. in those early years?
NBC and Donnie Simpson, and back in the day, man, that was a big job. I went from making $10,000 to $70,000. That was the early '80s when they had unions and good pay.
Yeah, unions and good pay, and when work was fun.
You're right.
I got a chance to read through the book, Blackout: My 40 Years in the Music Industry, and I got to tell you, it was an easy read, and I don't know if I'm partial because of my experience starting off in radio straight out of college. That made it that much more interesting and relatable. But the stories you tell, I mean, you've got a hell of a resume, and a hell of a collection of stories. And when you look at the end of it, you're like, man, you survived all of that. What does it look like on the other side to you? What does the game look like? What does music and entertainment look like for somebody that's spent 40 years in it?
Well, it's funny, man. Going back in time, music was so powerful, man. And music has sort of lost its power. It's more of an event now than it is a love of music. Like the songs we hear today, the Cardi and Megan and WAP, they burn out so quickly. But we used to love artists and bands for a long time. So musically, I'm deprived. Like the song that changed my life, I talk about in the book, was when I was growing up in Queens. I used to ride my bike by James Brown's house, and back then we were Negroes. And when "Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud" came out, I've been black ever since. And getting the power in songs now, it's just different, man. It's sort of like a quick burn. I got my own radio station down here in Orlando, The Wire, and I play hip hop and R&B still. And I'm 60 years old, but I love the art form. But the message and the messengers are just different now. It's sort of sad to me because music can be empowering. It's always been for black folks, and it's not the same anymore.
Now this is kind of a softball question, but you said you're 60, so you saw the birth of hip hop, of that genre. When and how did it change, in your opinion?
It's funny, man. In the '80s when hip hop sort of broke, we was still telling stories. The Public Enemies and the Chuck D's, and then in the '90s, once gangster rap and I got over to BET, we started, the balance was sort of gone. Like, back in the day, man, love songs were always number one. The Commodores, Earth, Wind and Fire, and Luther Vandross. like, I grew up as an only child, so I got my game off of like records, so now it's just different. It's, it's a quick burn. Now we whopping every day. And, there's still a lot of artists that have powerful messages in the music, but they don't get the same exposure because supposedly the audience doesn't want that. But I call that BS.
Now, as your days, back to your days at BET, you were a music programmer. And
I
for
was
those
program director talent. Mm-hmm.
For those that don't understand what that is, you were responsible for pretty much what we saw airing on the channel.
Yeah, indeed, man.
Yeah. So what type of challenges did you face back then? With with being somebody you were essentially a gatekeeper as far as the video content was concerned. So what were some of the things that you were up against back in those days, sitting in that seat?
Well, it's funny when I took over as program director at BET, there was just like a lot of garbage. We had like 1,300 videos, and I reduced it down to 200. And the labels, they moaned, they groaned, but our ratings went up. This was before the sale to Viacom. And I just made a lot of changes. And we, at the time, BET was in 66 million homes. And when I took over at BET, I knew the game had changed. I checked into my hotel, and that next Saturday, I got a FedEx, and it had $30,000 in cash, 3 envelopes with $100 bills in it. And I was like, damn, this game has changed. Before it was, movies and concerts and parties,
tickets,
and then it just turned in. It turned into cold cash, and and that's how the business is run. We're in a capitalistic society, and people just don't understand the business side. There was like $11 billion in the music industry. Anyway, there's so much money in the industry, and everybody thinks they can zoom to the top, but there's just so many hands that got to get paid.
So when you get there and that type of money is floating your way, people on the outside looking in, they a lot of people to this day still don't realize that is what was taking place back then. There was a reason why you saw a video 10 times in an hour. There was a reason why a certain song was played 20 times a day. And that reason was money, for lack of a better word.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's what drives it. You could have the greatest song and you'll never hear it. I mean, I see it to this day. I mean, it's funny, when the Cardi B and Megan song came out last Friday, it broke all types of records. I looked up the numbers and the spins. Certain stations were playing it every hour on the hour. And that's not by coincidence. There's not like 500 programmers that do the same thing because songs are so good. It's, whose hands, I always say programmers' hands are like cups. They're always asking for something. It's like metal cups, And I used to hear about it and see it, but once I took over at BET, I really saw it. But then, the powers that be sort of were upset at me because they were making, $100,000 videos, and I wasn't playing them because they were garbage. But as the ratings went up and the station, BET, did better, it was a good thing, at least for the network.
Now, now this is funny to me. You, at the beginning of the book, it's called Blackout, my 40 years in the music industry, by Paul Porter. At the beginning of the book, you make a statement. This is a work of nonfiction. The stories are true, but some of the names and situations, have been changed. And then when I get to the book, like, I recognize every name. And I'm like,
Except two. Except two.
Okay. You named
Yeah.
everybody, and one of the stories that you told was about Donnie Simpson, the great Donnie Simpson, and you were saying how in the midst of everything that was going on in the game at that time, and how the game was played and what you did, you said Donnie Simpson was one of those individuals who, from your vantage point, always kept his nose clean.
Yeah.
And so my question to you is, how did you, with all of that energy around you, how did you navigate that? Because you obviously have a conscience then and now, but you were in the seat. So how were you able to navigate and stay out of the way, but at the same time be influential and impactful enough to get your job done?
Well, I think it was Donnie that sort of inspired me because Donnie was just different, but Donnie was making a lot of money. And a lot
true.
of people in radio don't make hundreds of thousands of dollars. So he had a sense of freedom. He trusted me. He said, play this, do this. I give him this. And it was that. And then later on in my career, I started going different places and, I felt helpless. And, I got orders. I got orders at BET to play this because Def Jam was spending $3 million a year at the sales department. And I'm like, this is trash. Play it. And I used to get into those battles. Don't think it didn't come with stress and pain. I started Kathy Hughes in Radio 1 in a trailer on 4th and 8th. We went from a 0 to number 4 in 9 months. I remember the day Kathy Hughes made her first $1 million, and she was happy.
Phew.
But but things have changed, man. It's a corporate world right now, and that's okay. But I'm more into, and I don't want to say consciousness, but I know how important music is for us, and we've always fell in love with songs and artists. But, the industry doesn't build them the same way anymore. Like I said, it's a quick burn, quick fatigue.
Now, you talked about corporations and these companies being run by certain people. Now, the elephant in the room with respect to that part of the conversation is always the same. You talk about black-owned businesses. You mentioned Radio 1, and we're talking about BET. Do you, in your opinion, just based on what you've seen, were they in better shape when they were black-owned and operated, or when the larger white companies came in and took them over?
Oh, I think BET was much better in the early days. I mean, we had different programming. We had balance. We had Teen Summit. We had shows for different audiences. And, as once you go public, it's about stock earnings. It's not about listeners. And, it's how to reach the most people at one time. And I don't think they're always right, but that's why, I've had this long, different path. It's just not enough substance for me, not enough caring. And it keeps happening now. I hear these debates all the time about, black-owned and black businesses, but like I call it selective amnesia. We remember what we want to remember and forget what we want to forget at certain positions, and that's happened at BET or at Radio 1. Like there was news. Black radio was community. That was the voice you can trust. And it's not the voice that you can trust anymore. It's just a voice. Nobody's listening for political news or local news. Everything's more on a national level.
Now, is that because our appetite as consumers has changed, or the size of the buffet table? Which one? Who do you lay that at the feet of?
The buffet table. Look, I tell stories like back in the day, and I know because you've been there. Like a top record, in the 80s, early 90s spun every 3 or 4 hours. Now it's every 60 minutes. You get that heavy dose of whoever's on top all the time, and you don't get that balance. So it's a smaller piece of the pie that we get to hear, but that's just traditionally how corporations run. You know, black radio for a long time was run by black folks.
Right.
And when you look at these companies, the real decision makers ain't black. You know, I just got into a thing about WAP with a local programmer at Cox who's white, who I love him like a brother, but he doesn't understand the same thing because, you know, I remember when I went to Jimmy Iovine's house who ran Interscope. You know, and they were the gangster label. When I went to his house in Jersey, his kids were riding horses, and it's just a different feeling when you don't have the experience of knowing the crack dealer or somebody's in jail or seeing what it really does to your community. And that's what I think gets lost when the suits at the table, you know, make all the decisions.
Now, we've seen a new era of consciousness really kind of take over the game in summer 2020. I don't even know if there's a nickname for it yet, but just this collective wokeness that we witnessed from May to July. There's room for change as far as the music is concerned. Do you think it will ever go back? You know, whereas we're waking up, you know, young people and millennials and whatnot and saying, you know what, that music, we got a soundtrack. Hip hop is like a soundtrack for murder right now. And that's not feeding us. You know what I'm saying? Do you think there'll ever be a time where it will go back to the even, it don't even have to be conscious, but a little bit more, stomachable with kids in the car? Do you think it'll go back to that?
No, I don't. Unless folks start talking up, because I see folks defending it all the time, you know. And I know I heard you talking about WAP last week, and now people look at songs like that as a liberation song. And, you know, that's a different type of liberation, you know. I call it a strip club song. I know where the place is, but if 80% of the songs sound like, you know, and I expect nothing less from Cardi and Megan. That's cool, but I just want some balance. There are no Chuck D's, there are no KRS-Ones, there's a J. Cole here and there, but, Kendrick Lamar. But for the most part, it's about beating a sister over the head and misogyny and all that. And I think it feels different, you know, when you're 10 years old or 15 years old hearing it. And when I was that young, I didn't hear those type of things. So when I see young kids growing up, and this is the steady diet they get, I used to be mad at the kids. And that's sort of what turned my life around, you know. I was mad at them for being so raunchy, and then I said, I'm taking part of it. There was, you know, I was in New York at Hot 97, and there was this record by Raw Digger. Like, we used to date part songs, and the chorus was "Got to beat that bitch with a bat," and a 11-year-old came up to me at a school out in Queens, crying about Mr. Paul. Can you get this record off the radio? And I read her note, and I said, "What happened, Latia?" And it's in the book. It's in the book. I said, "What happened?" She said, "My mother got beat up by my father. He beat her with a bat, and she's in Roosevelt Hospital." And right then the light bulb went off. I went back to Hot 97 and Emma's Broadcasting, and I told the story, and they made a quick reaction. They pulled the songs off, and a week later, I was off the air.
Wow.
They got rid of me, and that's when I started my fight, you know, because the corporate heads were like, yo, we making money. And it's sort of like the drug dealer, you know. Yeah. They give out turkeys on Thanksgiving, but they ravage your community the whole time. And that was my general manager's excuse and the owner's excuse. And next thing I knew, I was on television, and here it is 20 years later. Well, 20 years later, I'm still fighting the same battles.
Now let's talk about that. How are you fighting? What are you doing now that's got you in a position where you able to put up that fight?
To be independent, not to be a slave to a check. I bought my own radio station. I get to speak freely. Is it the best of times always, being in the forefront and taking a lead? No, but spiritually and mentally, I feel better. I know some of the fights. I've gotten songs and shows taken off of MTV and just different movements. I started a nonprofit with my partner Lisa Fager. It was called Industry Years, and I got a site called Rap Rehab, and just educating. And I get to do a lot of college lectures and talk to a lot of kids around the country. And once they find out how the business runs, they get it. There was this great documentary by Byron Hurt. It's called Beyond Beats and Rhymes. And I think it's the best hip-hop documentary. I urge your audience to watch it. And it came out like 15 years ago, but it's still true that rappers rap because what they hear on the radio. That's not their only story, but they think to be down, they gotta be gangster, even though they're not. And I just want to make it cool so we can tell uplifting stories, too. Just get some balance. And I love the gangster stuff. That's part of my life, too. I just don't want to hear it 85% of the time. And I don't want to just target little kids.
Yeah, exactly. And that's always been my gripe, even when I was there in radio years ago, in music radio. And my whole gripe was, I throw your guns in the air, Onyx. 92, 93, Wu-Tang, all that. Like I was there. I'm in it. And I do want to hear, but at the same time, all day, every day over free radio. Radio is a free medium. That's what people gets missed on a lot of people. It's a free medium. So that means you really can't, you have no protection against it other than to change the channel. Most people out of habit, they're not changing the channel because that's what they want to hear. So you gotta, your kid. Mm-hmm. I was just gonna say, like in the car, in the mornings, you got the kids in the morning, you got, it's not like, all right, movies are R-rated. You're paying to go see that movie. It's not a free medium. So you can put whatever you want in it. But with commercial radio, specifically urban radio, specifically with white people in charge, I feel like we're bombarded with the negative vibe and that negative energy, and we're so used to it generationally. It's like, no, this is normal. Like, this is what, this is what we supposed to be. This is how we are. This is black people. And we don't even know how much poison we put in our own soul.
But when the big change happened, there was a time when black radio, you could be in the car with kids, and then they split it up. They made urban adult contemporary and the oldies, and then they made the hip-hop. So as some folks got older, they left one side, and their kids listen to one thing, and as adults listen to something else. And that's when it started to really get sour, It really got stupid. And there's nothing more impressionable than stardom, So
right.
we see what stars. So, I hear more. There was the thong song, 15 years ago, but every song talks about stripping and anyway.
And the you are. The thong song was light though. That was, when you think about it, that was so light. You wish you could have just a song about underwear now.
Well, people were wordsmiths. I remember back in the day when people complained. When I started in radio, I remember when the Isleys came out with "Between the Sheets." That was like a terrible lyric, but it was tastefully done. D'Angelo had "Brown Sugar," and that's a weed song. But now it's this: roll my blunt, stick it in your. It's wordplay's not available anymore.
We're joined by Paul Porter, author of Blackout: My 40 Years in the Music Industry. Now, I wanted to talk briefly. One thing I read in there, it said you were never actually fired from BET, but you were staying in a hotel, and your accommodations just magically ended. Tell that story. Tell that story if you can.
Well, at the time, man, they had brought over who I still love. His name is Stephen Hill, and for years he ran BET and everything. And I don't know if it was, a power move, but, for the last 60 days, I never saw him. He would run the other direction. And it was it's this typical, some people aren't confrontational, but I was in a hotel. I had a $45,000 bill. I was in Hotel George, and they kept paying the bill, and I thought it was crazy. And I found out through somebody else. I left. I took my computers and everything else from BET and never walked back in the building again.
Wow.
But he knew the power in taking the money. You can get rich programming networks, and and I saw the change when I left right away, because all the garbage went back in and the same dumb messages and everything else. But he's in that film Beyond Beats and Rhymes. They ask him a question, and Steven runs off the camera because he knew he's wrong. And that's why sometimes I point it out, man. And I'm not perfect. I named all my failures in that book, too. I failed like everybody else, but you got to take responsibility for it.
Now, some of the names that you mentioned, your old counterparts or whatever, do they still rock with you? Like knowing how, the position? Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. When I first started, people were real quiet, and over the years, and it's not that I had some special foresight. I just had a little more kahunas than some folks, And once I got that second good job, sometimes when people are in jobs, they get real quiet, because they got to pay bills. But I learned I could recreate myself and do other things at other times. And now's the perfect time. I got an app. It's called ConsciousCon. It's iOS and Android. I'm building my own messages, do my own thing, and I'm not a slave to Instagram or Facebook, even though I use them all. But I just think it's time that we need to build our own media and messages. And I've got to work with some good people back from college, Wendy Williams, Joy Reid. I've been blessed to work with some of the best people in the business and build with them over the years. And there's a lot of good people in it, but there's a lot of weak people too.
So talk to me about ConsciousCon. What does that look like? What do I get from that?
ConsciousCon, man, there's this positive messages, man, from videos to, like, I do a live broadcast tonight at 7, and we talk about real things. And a lot of my stuff is geared music related. And, I'm trying to deal and pass it on. The one thing that's kept me alive is keeping involved with younger people. Kiki D, a 22-year-old rapper at American University, or Suzanne Christine. I just can't stand. There's a difference between experience and expertise. And they have a lot of folks that are older that don't get the younger side because they want it to be the heyday back in the day, and it's changed. So if you're not listening to everybody, it's invalid, And when you talk to these folks, when I go to colleges or the elementary schools, I can talk on their level, and they understand that. They really do, because we got to do a better job of going back and forth and talking to people. and younger people and telling our stories. We don't do enough of that.
Now, speaking of that, and as we wrap up, give me a good story. Give me one of your more memorable occasions from your 40 years in the music business, or a couple. Give me a couple of them.
Man,
those wow moments, because I know you got them. I know you got them.
Matter of fact, C-SPAN gave me a special on the book. If you look up Paul Porter and Blackout, I tell a lot of the stories. They gave me 90 minutes. But there was a time when I was in D.C. and back early 80s, man, everybody was rolling back then. There was no COVID, there was no poverty, and everybody was getting high. So I go to the local dope man's house and I walk in and I see on the couch, like you open the door and on the couch there were three people. One was Mayor Marion Barry, one was John F. Kennedy Jr., and the other was Jim Vance, who was probably the best black anchor in America in D.C. forever, and they're all gone now. They all have died, and that moment stuck with me, and that's when I sort of got my head together. I thought getting high was cool and doing this and all that, and I saw them sweating on the couch, and 45 minutes later, I had cocaine sweats, and that sort of started changing me and bringing me back, because I was part of the movement. I was just like soaking it up, and I went to DC. I'm 24 years old, making $75,000 in 1982. You couldn't tell me anything. But once I started seeing people fall and talking to people, you just get to learn. You get to learn. And working with I went to Africa with Stevie Wonder on his first trip when I was at BET. We went to Cameroon, and
nice.
Even though I got a dumb Stevie Wonder story, can I tell that?
Yeah, you absolutely can. What does that even mean?
So I'm in awe because I'm with Stevie Wonder, and we're over there with a group of people from BET at the embassy and hanging out. And Stevie calls me, and at the time, Cameroon was like the AIDS capital of the world. This is in '92. And we got to go to the hospitals, and I threw up. And, all the guys on the crew, all the women spoke French there, but, all the guys were making booty checks. And Stevie calls my room. Back at the time, that's when Magnum condoms were out. And I was like, I don't want to have any sex in Africa. I was just in the hotel. And Stevie called me for a couple of condoms to come to his room. And I walked in, and Stevie had three beautiful women in there. And I was like, wow, I gave Stevie Wonder my condoms. So I know that sounds silly, but it just sticks out. I got to bring Michael Jackson on stage. So, there's been a lot of up times, but I've also been broke, When they kicked me out of New York, I was living in my BMW 635 CSI because I didn't have New York money after I took a stand. So, there's a lot of pain, and the book talks about the ups and downs.
Well, there it is, ladies and gentlemen. Paul Porter. The book is Blackout: My 40 Years in the Music Industry. Hey, man, you're a giant in the game, a mentor to a lot of people, a walking storyteller. I appreciate you coming on the show, man. Much appreciated. I wish you the best.
Hey, man.
Round of applause.
Lamont,
Paul Porter, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you for the shot. All right.
All right.